Hi, my name is Stephen Daniels. I am a senior majoring in environmental studies at Cal State San Marcos. I will also be minoring in psychology. This semester, I'm tasked with a final project that is very open ended. I can basically do whatever I want as long as I can relate it to my growth and knowledge learned from this class. The class, Parks and Public Land, has covered many subjects from the different land management organizations to roadkill distributions on highways. But one thing we read was an article called Smokey Bear is a White Racist Pig. That's right. Smokey Bear is a White Racist Pig by Jake Kosek in 2006.
Wait, what? We're talking about Smokey the Bear? How could he possibly be racist? And he sure don't look white to me. You're messing with a childhood icon of mine, man.
Yeah, I was kind of shocked too. What the hell kind of article is this going to be? I immediately imagined a crazy person yelling this out loud because of some frustrated misunderstanding. Surely that person doesn't understand that Smokey is just trying to help. But no, it was in the book Understories, The Political Life of Forest in Northern New Mexico. And the article gave a thorough history of how the Wartime Advertising Council just slapped Smokey's image over those disturbing racist posters they did during World War II. Remember those?
Yeah, there are so many of them. They would depict a sadistic looking person of color, either black, Asian, or Latin man, and they would be setting fires and implying they're saboteurs. So this is what Smokey evolved out of, huh?
Yeah. So there was this, and the fact that there have always been land practice conflicts with the local Latin New Mexican population. Long story short, the traditional ecological knowledge included practices like controlled burnings that greatly conflicted with the modern US Forest Service ideas. We know now that fires are actually a very important part of many natural ecosystems, including forest. I can't really say that we didn't know this back then. We just chose not to listen to thousands of years old, time tested research because it came from brown people. It makes the whole thing very suspect that it was really about preserving wood for timber industries. What's worse is that the US Forest Service tried to make a Spanish speaking Latino version of Smokey to win Latinx people over. Oso Humoso, which was very insulting because they just dressed it up in old school poncho and sombrero.
What? That's not how New Mexicans dress. I can see where this just made things worse. That's a little bit like insult to injury kind of thing.
Yeah, lots of conflicts. Regional newspapers like El Grito del Norte even ran parody cartoons of Smokey as a clueless forest ranger from Texas, which is where the white racist pig thing comes from.
Yeah, so what does this have to do with your project?
Well, the story was just part of a whole learning cycle about the prejudiced past of public land services. Organizations like the Sierra Club and the fact that minorities always got the short end of the stick with public spaces. And besides the fact that they still do, this has also created a social pattern where minorities are less likely to use public parks because they feel much less safe and welcome than many white people would. Originally, I thought I would do an audio podcast to address some of the reasons for this for the continued inequalities in US park systems, but now I've got a video going, so I don't know what to call this. A conversation with myself and my inner thoughts, perhaps, but at the risk of sounding like I'm white splaining to the world about solving racism, I thought I would just be a platform, mostly to other woke white folk, to start a conversation about how to help change this.
How are you going to do that? I mean, you should have did something on the spotted owl or something else, man. This seems ambitious. How are you even going to start?
Like anything, you start with the acknowledgement of the problem. I probably shouldn't be surprised that anything in this country has a racist past when so much of the country was literally built with slave labor. But I was still shocked by the info about Smokey Bear. And I think that many other white people don't know about it either. Furthermore, I doubt most white people know about how unwelcoming parts can be to their darker friends and family. But according to Carolyn Finley, who wrote Black Faces, White Spaces in 2014, Historically, federal land management agencies were known for their conservative conservation behaviors, often seen catering to the needs of the middle class leisure activities and neglecting marginalized social groups. Now, she goes on to say that this has changed in the past 30 years. Today, one can find tremendous evidence of federal agencies actively reaching out to diverse audiences, from urban youth to rural Latino populations. So they're on it. Yay! Well, this may be one of those things where the damage has already been done. Alex Bailey is a man that really knows the truth of this. He is the founder of an organization called Black Outside, whose mission is to recolor the outdoors. They work on expanding outdoor opportunities to more Black youth across Central Texas. He did a TED Talk presentation in San Antonio about the stigma that African Americans have against public lands, where it came from, and how to overcome it. Alex explains that his grandfather used to sneak him off to outdoor activities behind his family's back. He found out why much later.
My family revealed to me that my grandmother, during those teenage years, was brutally sexually assaulted and beaten by a group of white teenagers. They were never fairly prosecuted for the crime. And it was a trauma that she had to live with for the rest of her life. For my grandmother, the outdoors was a place of pain and tragedy.
In one sense, Bailey was lucky he had a grandfather that would sneak him off. In another sense, this is absolutely tragic that his family was put in this situation in the first place. The fact of the matter is that this is a common experience and viewpoint for many Black, Asian, and Latinx people in this country, especially the older generations.
And it's the older generations that teach the young. That includes joys and fears. So if something like this happened to your grandmother, then it is likely that you could pick up those same stigmas, even if parks are now a much safer place.
Exactly. The damage is already done. Even if parks are now welcoming to people of all colors, it is still a predominantly white activity. A lot of people say this is more of a social economic problem, and that if our society was more egalitarian, you would see more people of color participating in public activities. And there is some truth to this. Things like skiing, horseback riding, ATVs all cost money that poor people don't have to spend. However, Lee Kangaji, excuse me if I messed that last name up, who wrote a research paper called Public Space, Park Space, and Racialized Space, said that a major problem with public parks is the continued presumed perception from people of color that they are white spaces that are not for them. This is shown to be a systematic problem that spans from coast to coast and goes back to the origins of creating parks. Southern states, for example, had racially segregated parks with very few available for Black people. The research shows that people of color are currently avoiding parks in their own neighborhoods because of the learned experience from history. Ironically, people of color were often employed as a maintenance crew for the spaces they were not allowed to enjoy.
Yeah, those old Jim Crow laws really messed things up for our country. These laws were literally set up to exclude people of color from parks and land. And then when there was a public outcry to fix these inequalities, the facilities built to accommodate them were substandard in comparison, to say the least. This is really not much different from every aspect that poor and often colored communities have to face every day, not just with parks. And even though Jim Crow laws have changed, minorities still bear the brunt of our nation's pollution problems. They still often cannot get away from their red line neighborhoods and feel trapped by a system that was designed from the beginning to exclude them from enjoying the great outdoors.
So, if you're a person of color, this is just preaching to the choir. If you're a white person, you also most likely know about racial inequalities, even if you haven't experienced them personally. It's 2021. There is no excuse for not knowing at this point. I could continue to document inequalities based on racial discrimination for days on end, but I don't want to do that. I would much rather talk about proactive solutions to mend deep social wounds. We are currently a little more than a year into quarantining and socially isolating ourselves from the COVID 19 virus. Parks are more important than ever to our mental and physical health and our well-being in general. However, an article from The Guardian last year reported that millions of Americans lack access to quality parks. Guess which social class?
Poor working class communities. Unfortunately, the lack of using parks in these neighborhoods has these communities caught in a sort of negative feedback loop that is preventing change. A lady named Ming Wen in 2013 proved that ethnicity and poverty are important correlates of spatial access to parks and green spaces. You can use her formula to calculate the probability of a neighborhood's ethnic makeup just by looking at how many parks it has on a map. And I imagine that this is making the problem even harder to address. I've read some research being done, for example, about assessing people's knowledge and attitudes about climate change, but this requires people participating to be as diverse as possible and at least represent the population. Sarah Schweitzer in 2013 did a study called Changing the Conversation About Climate Change, where she used park visitors for her study about environmental communication. She did a great job in her project. However, only 2% of the study actually represented African Americans, and only about 4% for Latinos. It wasn't her fault that minorities didn't show up to participate in her study, but this still reduced the study's external validity. This reminds me of an old psychological saying: even the rat was white. So, how do you think we can evolve past this? How can we individually help create places that practice radical inclusion?
So I have just two simple solutions. One is something you are already doing right now, educating yourself. Do your research. If you are participating in organizations like Bailey's Black Outside, then you're already helping. Question everything, especially your sources. Don't let fake news bait you with a real story today, get you to trust it, then start slipping in propaganda. Propaganda is what got Smokey into his and us into this mess. But I think propaganda could be used to get us out of it if it's factual and used for the good of the whole. Smokey Bear may or may not be a racist. You have to read Kosek's article and decide for yourself. It is definitely subjective and complicated, but I think that he will be around for a good while yet. But now when I see things like the new Smokey Bear Oregon license plate, I pause and think, I sure wouldn't want to take that car through New Mexico. My second suggestion is that people stop using the term race. Bear with me now. The origin of the word is from colonization times. They had the idea that humans, created by God, were so completely different from animals that they came up with different biological terms. The term race is a made up social construct. It implied that different ethnicities were basically different species that couldn't interbreed. This, of course, is a stupid statement. Biologically, humans are all different phenotypes of the same species. Yet we continue to use the word when we could be saying color, ethnicity, or my brother from another colored mother. But to be clear, the term racist is still appropriate. Racists do exist. You don't have to believe the earth is flat to believe in flat earthers, after all.
So, is that it?
Well, I suppose I have one last suggestion to help recolor the outdoors. Call up your Black, Asian, and Latinx friends and go camping with them. Get vaccinated, go to a park, play frisbee or whatever, just go have fun. You and I both know you sit behind a screen too much, so get out there already. I know I'm ready for summer.